Hello, everybody. I'm Leon Morris. I'm the president of the Pardes Institute of Jewish Studies and also a Pardes alum. I'm so delighted that you've all joined us. In early May, the Pew Research Center released their new report on American Jews based on a survey of 4,700 American Jewish adults fielded from November of 2019 to June of 2020. The previous Pew study was 7 years earlier in 2013. And all summer, much of the American Jewish community has been in the process of analyzing the Pew study. At Pardes, our interests in the findings of the study were far-reaching. For 49 years, we've been an incubator of new Jewish leadership grounded in the classic texts of Jewish life. We've striven for what we like to call the Beit Midrashification of Jewish life. We've tried to create a thicker, more informed, more knowledgeable American Jewish community by emphasizing the continued relevance of Jewish sources for our time. And since such a distinctive component of our Beit Midrash, our study hall, is bringing together Jews of different denominations and practices, we were particularly interested in what the study could tell us about how American Jews relate to Jews who see the world and Judaism differently than themselves. And it was that question that led us to one incredible family to whom so many of us are connected in one way or another, to provide a fascinating window into how we might understand the Pew study, and more than that, how we might understand American Jewish life as it evolves. So it is my pleasure to introduce you to the Abrahamson-Zinkow family, 2 generations, 4 rabbis, and 3 denominations. Rabbi Elka Abrahamson is president of the Wexner Foundation, a foundation that's had an enormous impact on so many professional and lay leaders in American Jewish life. 30% of Wexner Graduate Fellows are Pardes alumni. And so many of us feel as though Pardes and Wexner shaped the Jewish leaders that we became. Elka has served as the president of the foundation for 10 years. Prior to that, she was vice president and director of the Graduate Fellowship Program. She's the High Holiday Rabbi at the 92nd Street Y and is an engaging teacher and dynamic speaker. Rabbi Misha Zinkow is the journey builder at Makor Educational Journeys and a respected and beloved colleague. After 32 years in the rabbinate, Misha stepped away from pulpit life in 2017 to build an encore career immersed in Israel education and advocacy. Misha served as the camp director of Camp Swig. He was a pulpit rabbi in San Francisco and St. Paul, Minnesota, a position he shared with Elka, and was most recently the senior rabbi of Temple Israel in Columbus, Ohio. Rabbi Amir Zinkow is the Middle School Mishnah and Gemara Curriculum Coordinator at the Leffell School in Westchester County, New York. And Rabbi Maya Zinkow is the Senior Jewish Educator at the UC Berkeley Hillel. Both Maya and Amir are proud alumni of Pardes, and we're so proud of them and their accomplishments. In so many ways, this very special family is a microcosm of the American Jewish community. One family with different perspectives, varied educational journeys, diverse professional trajectories, and different generations. So thank you for being with us. Thank you for welcoming us. Yes, please. Elka.
Leon, thank you. And I am obligated on behalf of the family to say that we have 2 other children, who are not rabbis, and we're incredibly proud of them. So they're on this call, and Yael and Ilan, we love you just as much. So I just want to make that clear.
But they're
very,
both,
very important.
we like to say that they're also in the entertainment industry.
So I want to begin by just really talking about surveys and studies. The fraught nature of censuses in Jewish life. In the Tanakh, counting people is a precursor of going into battle or a precursor of a plague. And there's a preference that has developed for not counting people, but rather counting people by counting coins or counting thumbs in the Beit HaMikdash and the temple, but not counting heads. We don't want to reduce people to numbers. And yet, studies like Pew are very important tools for designing strategy for Jewish life. And so I wanted to ask you to just share with us very briefly a sense of the way in which you think about and relate to studies such as Pew. Were you waiting with anticipation for its release? How do you see its findings being integrated into your own work and your own thinking about American Jewish life? Just to kind of get us into the notion of a study itself. And then we'll jump into particular issues. But what do these studies do for you? Misha, you want to get us started?
Sure. I think that you can never just look at one study alone. So you need to look at trends, and not just between 2013 and 2020, but going back and going back. I think that they're very helpful in they make me both optimistic because of the high engagement that Jews say they have in Jewish life, in all ways. And of course, on the flip side, they make me anxious and pessimistic because of the waning of engagement. But part of me thinks that if you were to take a survey 100 years ago, 150 years ago, we'd be doing some of the same hand wring. We'd be optimistic, and we'd also be pessimistic, because so much of what happens in Jewish life is also because of because our boundaries, are so affected by what goes on around us. It's just so hard to come down on one side or the other. But certainly they're helpful in policy formation, I think, in the long run.
Thanks, Misha. Elka, you like these studies?
Yes, and I was part of the committee that shaped the Pew Study 7 years ago, so I really appreciate the work and the intention and how responsible Pew is about these studies. I think the studies give us snapshots, and I think we have to be very cautious about not being stuck in the snapshot, but really take it as a moment in time and figure out what we do with this snapshot. It also gives us names and defines certain categories. And I think we can't get stuck on those names. We can talk more about that. I think we have to use the data to really propel us into new areas of creativity and innovation. And I only worry about being stuck on the data and the definitions rather than using them to motivate us to think new, different, and more deeply about who we are as a community.
Thank you for that. We're going to come back to some of that, the notion of what does it mean to be stuck on data. Maya.
Yeah, I think, to be very honest, I was not waiting with bated breath to find out the study. And I think that is reflective of most of my generation of Jews and younger. And I think that a lot of those Jews, millennials, Gen Z, there's a certain amount of resentment, I think, that's built in terms of an older generation, and this is where the generational differences come in, an older generation talking about us without us, right? And kind of hemming and hawing and wringing hands about, like, decrying that our young Jews are not affiliated across the liberal movements. And I think for the most part, Jews of my generation and younger feel like we're okay, you don't need to worry about us. I, as a rabbi and a leader, appreciate, again, like my mother was saying, having language for, we're trying to figure out how to refer to each other in this Zoom. Like Ema, you were saying, right, I appreciate having language to figure out what are the projects, what are the creative solutions that we might dream and scheme about. as we imagine the next 20, 50, 120 years of Jewish life.
Thanks, Maya. Amir.
Sure. First, thank you so much for having us this morning, afternoon, whatever time, wherever you are. When the Pew Study first came out, it was a blip for me, and okay, there's another Pew Study. Was really excited to be invited to be on this panel, and then said, oh, does that mean I have to read the Pew Study? And then I start looking at it, and they're really interesting numbers, and then I get bogged down in the numbers, and then I remember that I studied anthropology, which, as distinct from sociology, is about hearing stories and figuring out about culture from those stories. And so what I really get interested then is who are these people who said the things that make me say, you know, you think X, but also Y, how do you square those in your life? And how does that look for you? What does it mean to get more meaning out of hanging out with your pet than hanging out in a Jewish community? And what's meaningful about that? Because I want to hear about that. And that's really where my mind goes, is obviously I can't hear the story of all 4,000 people who were surveyed here, but I really go to who are these people? What are their stories? How can I hear them and be in conversation with them?
Can I just, Leon, jump on what Amir said, which is, I think these surveys are effective when we let them lead us to the story being told about our community and the people who are being discussed. I think that's a really important point.
Yeah, beautifully said. I want to delve into one of the most important findings, one of the starkest findings, I think, of religious divergence. And it seems like a good one, particularly for this illustrious panel that we organized. Two of you were ordained at Hebrew Union College, the Reform Seminary. One of you was ordained at Chovevei Torah, an open Orthodox seminary. One of you at JTS, the Jewish Theological Seminary, conservative seminary. And one of the findings of this study was analyzing the data on what Orthodox Jews feel they have in common with non-Orthodox Jews and what non-Orthodox Jews feel they have in common with Orthodox Jews. And the findings really pose significant challenges to communal cohesion. About half of Orthodox Jews say that they have not much in common or nothing at all in common with Reform Jews. And a majority of Reform Jews reciprocate those feelings. Only 9% of Orthodox Jews in the study said that they feel they have a lot in common with Reform Jews, and roughly the same percentage of Reform Jews concerning Orthodox. So I want to ask you to reflect on that and to reflect on what the communal implications are for an increasingly bifurcated Jewish community. You know, this is kind of what's really out there that this survey revealed is the opposite of what the Wexner Graduate Fellowship community is like, or the Wexner Heritage Program, or Pardes. And so what are the—
Or this family.
Or your family. What are the implications and what are some interventions that we might be able to make? So Amir, you want to get us started first?
Sure. I'll say first that I feel that not having things in common with Jews who aren't Orthodox necessarily. We speak different languages. I don't mean English. I mean, when we use words, they mean different things. When I talk about Judaism, I talk about different things than what I'll, for lack of a better term, call the liberal segment of Judaism, though I'm certainly a liberal end of Orthodoxy. So some
of your best parents are liberals, so be careful.
Yeah, exactly. I have binders full of, so I feel that, but I also feel that there is something that still connects us. I think we have to, if we want to stay together, then we have to figure out what that is. We saw in the survey also that Jews care about each other across the board. I think even using that word care about means something different to different members of different Jewish communities. For an Orthodox person, for me, sometimes that means I care about you, and that means that I want you as another Jew to follow halakha. But that's not, if you told me, right, if a liberal Jew said to me, I hope you care about me, that wouldn't be what they're talking about, probably. So I think we have to really figure out how to share a language. And I think we have to figure out what our values are, the why of what we do, why we do what we do. Because if you ask me why I want another Jew to follow halakha, I could probably come up with a few different answers, and maybe one of them would actually speak to another Jew.
I appreciate this distinction between caring about that you're pulling out of the study, the distinction between caring about and having a lot in common, that it's possible to care deeply for another Jew, even who you don't feel that you share a lot in common with.
I have to credit my Abba for that one. He pointed out the apparent contradiction, but then teasing that apart and what that really means, I think is important.
Beautiful, beautiful. So Misha, with that hat tip, you wanna follow?
I think what I would want to add here is, and this is this goes to what Amir was saying earlier about stories. I'm not sure how people heard that question. I don't have a lot in common with, because if they did in fact answer the other question, I care about, I mean, maybe they care about other Jews just like they care about the environment. I don't know, just like they care about other human beings in general. So there might be room for another question. Do you care more about other Jews than you care about people who are not Jews, human beings who are not Jews? What's the gradation there? And if they're thinking very narrowly about my religious denomination, yes, if I'm praying in a Reform synagogue or I'm praying in an Orthodox synagogue, there's not a lot of, if I'm a born and bred and grew up in a Reform synagogue and walk into an Orthodox congregation, or even a conservative congregation for that matter, I might say, boy, I don't have a lot in common with these people. They're praying in the language that I really didn't learn. And so I think there are some implications here about Jewish education on the liberal end of the spectrum, but that's not what you asked me. So I don't really know what it means. I don't have a lot in common, unless it's really that narrow lane in terms of my religious observance.
Maya, please. Thank you.
Just to kind of keep in the theme of story, I'll speak from my Wexner experience, which is a blessing and a gift that I got to participate in. Halfway through the fellowship, we have a Shabbaton, and it's the first time you're spending real ritual time together as a group. And at the end of the time together, we were all sharing reflections. And one of my biggest takeaways was hearing from what we might call opposite ends of the Jewish spectrum, reflecting and noting about how alienated they felt from, or how they realized how much they did not have in common with other kinds of forms of prayer. There was someone in our cohort who was saying Kaddish for a parent, and so we had to have a minyan, and that person's minyan preference was a halachic egalitarian minyan, which meant that I was exactly in my comfort zone. And it also meant that the people that could make up that minyan were people from different kinds of denominations, I'll just say that, for whom that was not their comfort zone. And it never even occurred to me that the people in the room would be uncomfortable with the form of prayer we were doing. And at the end of the Shabbaton, I was noting how that exact Shabbaton was my happy place, sitting around a tish table singing both Debbie Friedman and Ka'ach Sof. And that I am so lucky and take for granted that that's my position in the Jewish world. And I think it comes from what Abba you were pointing to, which, like, though it wasn't directly an answer to the question, I think it is the answer to the question, which is creating a sense of Jewish thickness, which I was lucky enough to have been brought up in. Though I was brought up in a Reform Jewish household, that never meant that the other expressions of Judaism were unavailable to me, or were gated off. And so I think that thickness, right, and being able to establish a shared language of, like, doing Jewish looks and feels like many different things. And I know that expression it's not easy in every community, because that's not necessarily true in every community. Right, on a communal level, you can't say, or it's hard to say, right? Doing Jewish looks like lots of things, and we happen to be, you happen to be here, especially in the liberal Jewish world, where we are trying to hold on to those small numbers, right? It's hard to say you could go and do this somewhere else without saying we're actually this is the best. This is the best.
Right.
But I'll just retweet, double asterisk that point about creating a sense of thick Jewish education. I think is really important, kind of rooting in that shared language.
Can I just, before Elka responds, just two things I wanted.
Sure.
One is we always felt that you were growing up in an eclectic Jewish home, not a Reformed Jewish home.
Right.
Because of the variety of experiences, and because of and then the other thing I was going to, just back to the issue of having things in common, because I've been dwelling on this question in my head. If those Reformed Jews that said little or nothing, and the Orthodox Jews said little or nothing, were asked, do you believe they're praying to the same God of the Bible and Jewish history that you are? I think it'll be closer to 100%. So again, it's I think that there needs to be a deeper dive into that question. I think the surface answer is not reflective of the truth or the reality.
I also just want to add just two quick
points. No, I'm jumping in because I haven't had a chance. One is that, we'll get back to Maya. One is that I think anti-Semitism's rise might change the answer, because this was pre-pandemic and pre-that. So I'm going to park that. I want to tell a little more personal story, which is that when people find out that I have a son who's an Orthodox rabbi and a daughter who's a conservative rabbi, and they know that I went to HUC, lots of people will respond with oh, how does that make you feel? There's like a sense of like, you must be disappointed, which is so sad for me, as opposed to what I want them to say is, wow, you have a Torah-loving family. And that love is expressed in different ways. And that's what Wexner does, and that's what Pardes does. And that's what I think our rabbis, I'm gonna take off the extreme ends here, because I think the survey tells a story of, we're pulling this way. Let's take that great middle and start talking, and I'm talking about Jewish leaders, and start talking about our the people who aren't in the room as serious Torah-loving Jews, even if what serious means and what love means does not look the same as ours. And those are rabbis who say that to me, not people like rabbis who somehow think. And I really, as I speak about it, I get furious, because it's such a sad comment on how we see the people of Israel. And then I'll just add my second comment before Maya gets her second comment, which is, Leon, you said earlier that we were like, we represented, I don't know what your word was, like a unique, we're a microcosm of the Jewish people. I want to say, like, if only we were a microcosm of the Jewish people, and if only every Jewish family could afford what we were able to give our 4 children: day school, summer camp, American Jewish World Service, Pardes. I mean, I could go on and on about what we were able to give them. What'd you say?
Rabbinical school.
Oh, that was nothing.
Oh, that.
So, I mean, that's a really important point that the survey did not point out.
Investment in education.
and the profound gap between those who can afford it and those who cannot.
Yeah.
So-
Ima, that was exactly going to be my second point, was that the survey points to Jews are increasingly older, wealthier, and higher educated, and that I wanted to acknowledge my extreme class privilege and having grown up in the family that I did, and our responsibility as Jews of class privilege to think about and talk about how we allocate our funds, how our wealth has accumulated over time, and what we do with that wealth to help, yes, Jews become more Jewishly educated, but also to help heal the many injustices of the world.
I want to just also go back to Abba's point, which was about prayer and praying to the same God. There were two things that or two problems with that. One is the assumption that all these Jews are praying to a God at all, which I don't think is, I mean, based on the survey, doesn't seem to be true. And then you could say the same thing about Muslims and Christians, really, the Jesus part aside. What God are you praying to? What God are you praying to? Is that enough to keep us together? And how are you praying, right? If I have a Jew who's doing yoga as their form of praying to the same God, to me, that's not Jewish prayer. So even if they see it as having something in common with me, I'm not going to see that as something in common. Because they're not doing Jewish prayer. So
But Amir, are you still gonna love them as a Jew?
Of course. But again, right, for me, that means trying to get them to stop praying through yoga and open a siddur and teach them how to use a siddur.
But you're okay.
So I think Ima, your point about Torah is really beautiful, in that that is something we really can all have in common. And even though we might derive different values from it, we can all study it together.
Right. We speak about that a lot at Pardes, as like Torah is the common language that we have, whether you understand it in a more literal way, in a more interpretive way, regardless of the source of authority. It's a common language. I want to jump into an aspect of your last comment, Amir, which is that when we look at younger Jews in the study, there's a larger share of orthodoxy among younger Jews, and also a larger share of non-denominational identity. And the losers statistically among younger Jews in this study are conservative and Reformed Judaism. And I want to explore a little bit in a couple different ways. What do you make of the classic American Jewish denominations, conservative and Reform, losing ground among younger Jews? How are we to understand, for example, the jump from 3% of Jews aged 65 and older saying that they're Orthodox, while 17% of American Jews between the ages of 18 and 29 defining themselves as Orthodox, and 41% of young American Jews not identifying with any denomination of Judaism. And at first, when I saw that 41% not defining themselves with any denomination, I thought, well, that's interesting. That shows the success of post-denominational Judaism. But when you look more closely, 65% of that slice of 41% of American Jews consider themselves Jews of no religion, which I want to say a word about as well, because I think this is all part of a whole. This most significantly growing group among younger Jews, Jews of no religion, how are we to understand that? Is this a semantics issue? Is this the right terminology? Are the researchers asking the right questions? Are we being encouraged to rethink what religion is? Can a non-religious self-understanding of Jewishness be thick enough to survive? So I want you to help me make sense of, or share with us how you're making sense of, we look at younger Jews, there are significantly more Orthodox, there are significantly more Jews of no religion, conservative and Reform are losing ground. How do you interpret this landscape? Elka, can we start with you in this round?
Sure, Maya, was your hand up?
Yeah.
Okay.
I didn't see your hand.
I'm going to go first anyway. I'll just, because I'll be brief. I interpret it the following way. I think that the question that we need to be asking is not, whether people are Jewish and how they name their Judaism, but under what conditions they're going to embrace their Judaism. Again, so I'll go back to, this is a snapshot. So many people, or most people, are expressing themselves through lots of identities. And our ecosystem, what I derive from this question is that the Jewish ecosystem has to evolve to accommodate Jews however they self-define in a variety of stages and phases of identity, period. I think denominationalism is increasingly a definition of my generation. We can talk about whether that's okay. I just think it is. I think people, I'll just say briefly in our own Wexner world, when I started here 20 years ago at Wexner, we had very clear boxes that were easy to check off. First of all, now we have so many more boxes and we're wondering if we just get rid of the boxes because everyone wants to put it in all their identities, not just Judaism. So I think we have to see this as like people are resisting definition, and let's kind of open up how we define Jews and expose them to all kinds of meaningful, deep experiences and not worry about what they call themselves.
I want to, after we've gone around, I want to circle back, Elka, to your the phraseology that you used of stages and phases of Jewish identity, because you're suggesting something about the younger cohort slice here that might not be a frozen sense of self-identity throughout their Jewish life. And I think that's really interesting.
I hope it's not. Who wants to be frozen?
Yeah.
What do you mean? Sorry, what do you mean by that?
Well, that I think what I understood was the suggestion that at this stage of their life, of 18 to 29, they are a much greater percentage is self-defining as not a Jew by religion. When they're asked by the survey, I think the way that it works is you're asked, are you Jewish, Protestant, Catholic? Is your religion Judaism, Catholicism, Protestantism, Islam? And they say none. And then you say, well, tell me about your upbringing. Maya, please.
Yeah, I think most of those Jews who are Jews of no religion are not Jews of no religion. And so I think, to get back to your question of, are we asking the right questions? I would say the answer is no. And a more appropriate question might be, how do you get spiritual and communal fulfillment in your life? Because many of those Jews are going to yoga, as Amir said. Maybe it's Torah yoga, or maybe it's just their Bikram yoga class, or they're going to Soul Cycle, and like their spiritual community is Soul Cycle. And I think it's a balance, it's a tension between, right? Ima, you said, figuring out how to accommodate or be accessible, like the accessibility question, which is totally true. And a large part of me often feels like the rabbis and God do not need me to make those things accessible to Jews. Those things are on their own without me doing anything. They should be relevant, right? Torah and God are eternal. And like, why do they need little Maya Zinkow? Like, who am I to make it sexy?
I don't know what that means, Maya, that they shouldn't need you. All that rabbinical school education.
I'm allergic to and resistant to like having a Torah yoga class just because we think that it's going to bring Jews in, like a shiur will not. And like there's a tension there, because if we get them in the building, right, then maybe I can say, isn't this fun? Guess what? Judaism's best kept secret is that it's awesome and that it's cool. So I definitely struggle with that tension. And similarly, to bring God back into the conversation, I think a lot of people, one of my favorite things to do as a rabbi is convince people that they actually don't not believe in God, and to ask, tell me about the God that you don't believe in. Because so often that conversation, right? My sister, who's not on this call,
She gotta be on the call somewhere.
She's on the call somewhere, but like one of my biggest successes in life is convincing her that actually, yes, she does believe in God. She just didn't know that God could look, feel, sound like something that she wasn't brought up with, right? The toxic masculine God of the Bible, for example. So
where did she get that?
What do you mean? Where did she get that? That's
different call.
Okay. Anyway, that's all to say that those people are just getting spiritual and communal fulfillment elsewhere, and it is up to us to figure out how to help people understand that Judaism can offer those things. And I think it's a question of, and I think this goes back to what Amir opened with, the why. Like, why should you come and learn Torah and do yoga here, as opposed to just going to a Bikram yoga class? My answer would be that because it's ours, it's yours, the Jewish bookshelf and the Jewish inheritance is ours to do with what we will. It's our inheritance, and it's eternal. It's rooted in eternity. And to me, that speaks powerfully, and we have to figure out how to make that speak powerfully to other Jews.
Thank you, Maya. Amir?
I've forgotten the question a little bit at this point. But
Jews of no religion. Jews of no religion.
Jews of no religion is piece of it, and then this mapping among younger Jews of
right.
more Orthodox Jews and more Jews of no denomination and Jews of no religion.
So I think that the first thing to note is that it's not surprising that Orthodox Jews would be more comfortable in labeling themselves as Orthodox, because they live in a labeled society. It's a conservative, small c conservative world in which halakha loves to label things. So once you're labeling things, you might as well label yourself. I think that might be a big part of it. And then younger progressive people don't want to label themselves, as Ima said, in any respect of their lives, including their Judaism. I also agree with Maya. I think people are thirsty for religious and spiritual fulfillment.
Especially now.
Especially now. I think one thing that concerns me about it, or one thing that I would want to make sure happens, is that in addition to feeling good in your spirituality, there is a serving of the other, whether that's a capital O other as in a singular God, a lowercase other as in other people that you're serving out of Jewish commitment. I think that it can't, if it's a purely selfish, feel-good kind of spirituality, I don't see that as, I don't know if I see it as Jewish or not. I'd have to do more exploring, but it just doesn't feel good in my kishkas to say, come because you'll feel good. That to me is not a Jewish experience that I want to create. Not around Torah, and not around worship, and not around chesed, not around good, acts of loving kindness. It's not about feeling good. I think part of that comes from a concern of me about human nature and whether or not we are ultimately selfish beings, but that's a different conversation altogether.
I just want to add, because I know you train a lot of rabbis, as do we. I think there are rabbinic and other educators, I see some on this call, who are doing remarkable work in the field to break down, some of this, like Jews of these definitions, and really embrace the great middle, and bring great meaning to Jews who, yes, are hungry and don't know how to access it. So this isn't I don't want us to think that this isn't happening. This is happening in so many ways and in so many places, and so much more exhausting in the last 18 months than it's ever been. So I do want to give a huge shout out to all of my, professional colleagues and volunteer leaders as well.
If you'll allow me, going back to hearing people's stories, I think that's where the work starts. And I think that is what a lot of people are doing is, you hear someone's story and then connect it to some part of their heritage and their Judaism, and that can really be a meaningful experience. it is for me to facilitate that, and I hope that from the other direction it is as well.
And I want to hear from Abba, but I just also one thing to add is that I just want to underline, Ema, what you just said about Jews who don't know how. Like, I think there is a desperate want and need, and right, to both emphasize what you said, that there are already people obviously doing that amazing work of accessibility for all kinds of Jews with limited or less access. But right, holding people's hands to the doorstep of all that Judaism has to offer is like really holy and the important work. Misha, what say you?
Maya. I don't have a lot to add. I think those are all beautiful comments about the denominational question, right? That was the question that we're still on. I guess of the group, I served the longest, in an institution, in an institutional setting, including Hillel, which you didn't mention, Leon, but I think, I'm shouting out for our Hillel rabbi here. But I think that, there's a mistrust, I think, among millennials and younger of bricks and mortar and institutions and making long-term commitments. That, if you look at the way young people change careers and move far more than our generation did, I think that it's reflected in the way they do Jewish life, meaning that if synagogues just expect that they're going to have a regular revenue stream, people coming in, and in order to sustain the institution, because that's what Jewish households do. I think the pandemic highlights the need for synagogues to adapt differently to an emerging generation of people who don't want to pay dues to sustain an institution. They'll pay for something that sustains them, me or my chevra. They'll pay for those experiences, but they don't want that building fund and so forth. And so I think that success, I'll just anecdotally, as in the work that I've been doing for the last 3 or 4 years, I'm in search of, clients for the company for which I work. And so I spent a lot of time looking at synagogue websites, because our primary groups are synagogue groups. I find it interesting that titles like Reform, Conservative are not the headlines on synagogues' homepages anymore. And this goes to the feel-good piece, so I don't exactly know what to do with it, but I think we're in the transitional phase, because synagogues, and again, I echo Elka's words, synagogues have done remarkable work in helping the Jewish people stick together through this. And I really am in awe of my colleagues who have done this work over the last 1.5 years. Their websites haven't changed a lot, except for, streaming, so that you can see right away. The rest of it, we're a warm, welcoming community, diverse, inclusive, you get this long stream of adjectives. And they really believe that about themselves, but I don't think it says anything to a young person who's looking for belonging. I don't think that those words necessarily. Do you disagree, Maya? Because
we just had this conversation as a Hillel staff. I'll shout out my Berkeley Hillel colleagues who are watching. But we just had this conversation about signs and inclusive language. And when you decide to put and I brought up a conversation that Amir and I had about flags about pride flags, about what do flags stand for and what do they not stand for. And when we update flags to include, and when, when I was doing my job search, I was looking in different communities about what would my community be. And there was a synagogue website that I was on that had exactly that paragraph of like, if you are a Jew who, and listed every possible identity one might think of. The problem, of course, is that if you left out one identity, like that person is now not included.
So let me just.
On the one hand,
we're all talking at the same time, but I want to point out a contradiction that Maya just raised, which is on the one hand, we talk about resisting identities among your generation, like we don't want to be labeled. But then if you don't have like all the right flags which identify who you all are, then we get beat up. So there is this like small b, small u. So there is this weird, not sure how to present ourselves as institutions because it's hard to get it right for young people.
Right. So I just to finish my thought is that, so I do think that we're in this sort of transitional phase of trying to operationalize, if you will, what all those words mean on the ground inside of those walls. To say we're inclusive is one thing. To feel that inclusive as an outside, to get me through the door, that's hard enough. But if, how does that institution make me feel included? Without saying, and our daughter Yael, who, is not on the call this way, but, she and her wife are looking for a synagogue. And, we joked that, they'll go in and they'll identify themselves, as the daughters of active Jews, in both of them, active Jews, leaders in their synagogue, blah, 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 and we're afraid that, people in the synagogues that they go to will go, do you want to be on a committee? Do you want to be on the board? Like immediately, that's how they'll, and so.
That's happening to me. That's happening to me in Berkeley. I'm showing up to the conservative synagogue and every week I'm with a group of young people and the older generation is coming right up to us. Are you new here? And it's like, no, we've been coming for a few weeks and like, we're not going anywhere and it's okay. And actually that makes me feel, and I'm not someone who's going to go away. I'm going to keep showing up because duh, but like, it doesn't make me feel like it's confident in my generation.
I'm going to jump in. These responses are so incredibly rich, and I'm just conscious of our time, and I want to be able to cover a couple of additional issues before our time is over.
We should also just mention Elon. We should also just mention Elon before by name.
We'll do short answers.
Okay. So
well, the same thing happened in, right.
So here's the piece connected, Misha, to your post-pulpit life of providing meaningful experiences for American Jews in Israel. And I think maybe the piece that we didn't really need Pew for, because we feel it, we can take the temperature of the American Jewish community, is the declining attachment to Israel, particularly among younger Jews, and when it's broken down into age category, 45% of American Jews across ages describe caring about Israel as an essential part of their Judaism, but that 45% generally goes down to 35% when you look at 18 to 29-year-olds. And we could have had a whole call on why is this? Is this about the very idea of a Jewish state and about Jewish particularism? Is this about Israeli government policy over the last few decades? But I think what might be inspiring is to just hear very briefly your interventions, your ideas for what do we do with this? What do we do with this if it's not just descriptive? If there's something that should come out of this, that to go back to some of your opening comments, that this should be a driver of creativity in Jewish life. What should we see? Maya, maybe we'll start with you this time.
Great.
This is the short answer portion of the call, Maya.
The Israel
Thanks,
portion
Emma.
is the short answer?
Yeah. I think that a lot of it does have to do with governmental policy. And I think that in an increasingly humanistic world, it's harder and harder to justify on flat on a page, a democratic and a religious state. And I think that when young Jews are asked about those two things and having to choose between them, if that's the case, I just think that our young Jews are going to choose democracy, and that's a painful thing for us to think about and deal with. And I think it's the reality of the world that we're living in and the world that is going to continue to unfold before us. And so I don't know about interventions beyond having open and honest conversations about what does Israel make you feel? What are the feelings that come up? And actually having heart-opening conversations instead of head-opening conversations in terms of solutions, but actually lead with the feelings on campuses, in communities. And that's the work for now, is going to be about heart-opening conversations about that map.
Elka.
I'll just say that, I love Israel deeply and profoundly. I travel there 6, 7, 8 times a year. My love has grown deeper through knowing the public servants that I have the privilege to work with as the president of Wexner. They are incredible people. They're diverse just as we are. They have some of the same feelings as we do, some of the same, concerns. It took a long time for me to understand we're more alike than different. And I think that we have to be, I think our diversity, which many see as a weakness in this conversation, has to be pivoted and turned into a strength. We just cannot shut down the conversations. We will not win with the next great campaign or the next great slogan or the next great speaker. We will win with sustained, thoughtful, I'll use Maya's language, heart-opening conversations. I think we have to continue to pursue visits, across the board. And then I'll close with this, and I see people on this call doing this work. We have to do much better education from preschool on up. We have some of the smartest educators in the world. They have got to figure out how to do better work on teaching Israel in America, and underscore bold, and teaching Israelis about American Judaism, which has to get into the curriculum of Israeli schools. I have been a rabbi for 30, I don't know how many years, a whole bunch of years, 4 decades. I've been a woman my whole life. I cannot have one more Israeli say to me in the last 6 months, oh, women can be rabbis? Like, really? We're still having this conversation? So we have our work to do, and Israel has its work to do, and we have to talk different and better.
Misha.
Beautiful answers. It's hard to add much. I think whatever, I don't know the specifics, but whatever we have to do to strengthen a sense of peoplehood is what we have to do, whether it's Hebrew education specifically, many of the things that Elka talked about, Maya as well, Jewish history on both sides. I was having a conversation this morning with the CEO of Makor Educational Journeys, mentioning the call that we're going to be on. And he told me that today he heard a debate in Israel on the issue of, do we call it the diaspora or do we call it the Gula, the exile? And that debate, I thought that that was like long ago, like when I was in rabbinical school and living in Israel, and that was, so it's the, you know, the two monolithic cultures, that culture is so ingrained in both. We're over here, you're over there, Babylon and Jerusalem, and they're in parallel universes. I think the investment in education on both sides, as Elka said, is so critical to strengthening peoplehood. That's what the surveys across the board shows, the diminishing sense of peoplehood.
We call it Gullus, and we call it Gullus proudly.
Amir.
Sure. I'm grateful that I haven't been tasked with what Ima said needs to be done, which is figuring out how to teach Israel in the classroom. I don't know. I love the idea that Maya has, and I think it's really important in terms of how do we have these conversations? How does Israel make you feel? But if we don't teach Israel up till college, then the feeling that you might have about Israel is, well, it's a country in the Middle East that I see on CNN or Fox News, you know, whatever you watch, and then you have opinions of it based on that. I think that it's really painful for me as someone who is really attached to Israel and who celebrates Yom Ha'atzmaut religiously and who sees the existence of Israel as really God acting in the world. I hope my friend either is not on this call, or if they are, they don't mind me sharing the story that I was trying to share with them, that it's really hard for an American Jew to be told you don't know what it's like to live in Israel, so your opinions are null. And in that conversation, they actually said to me, well, you don't know what it's like to live in Israel. That's really painful. And so obviously I can't sit here and tell Israel what to do, but it seems to me that something needs to happen where our education about Israel is important on the other side of the ocean, and that the way we educate about Israel is important on the other side of the ocean, and they know what we're learning about, and they know what we're talking about, and we can do our work also to know a little more about what they're talking about as well, because I think that that's so important. It's not a relationship if I'm taught in America to care about Israel, and then an Israeli says to me, you don't know what it's like, or
I'm not taught to care about you.
Or I'm not taught to care about you. A woman can be a rabbi. Like, what is your Jewish community in America about? I have a colleague who wanted to start what I called a reverse right, which is bringing Israeli Jews to America. I hope he's working on it, because I think it's really necessary for us to meet Israelis on our own Galus turf. That all being said, I don't know what it means to be a Zionist Jew in America, because why don't we just move to Israel? So, you know, it's how do I, you know, again, you know, we sort of celebrate when an 18-year-old graduates high school and goes to Tzahal or goes to Israel. We, as in certain communities.
I was going to say, let's be careful about we.
We, as in certain communities. We in certain communities celebrate that. Other people have different feelings about it, but, you know, there's like this subtle encouragement of doing that while not saying that's really the best thing to do. So again, I'm grateful that I'm not tasked with figuring out that part of the education. I suppose if I had to think about it for long enough, I might be able to think of something to at least experiment with, but I'm not ready for that yet.
Thank you. I want to squeeze in a little bit more, because I see that people are, for the most part, not with a minute over our hour, are not dropping off immediately. And I want to, just because I think it's on the mind so much of American Jews, this can be open to any of you that want to address this, and then we'll just do a kind of a final go round. But want to talk about the increase of anti-Semitism in America, something that, you know, if I had asked this on a panel 5 years ago, it would have been regarded as like, what decade am I stuck in? You know, where am I living? And The survey showed that 53% of American Jews said that they feel less safe than they did 5 years ago. And of them, 17% hesitated to participate in Jewish observances or events. And there's something about that that really struck me, because we've seen in other moments that sometimes anti-Semitism can have the opposite effect, right? I think Sartre said, right, the anti-Semitism makes the Jew. I have on my bookshelf a few volumes of this Schocken Verlag, this spiritual resistance to the rise of Nazism in Germany, in which some of the most noted German Jewish scholars put out a volume every month, and German Jews subscribed to it. And there was this sense of, well, if we're suddenly being called out as Jews, we should know something more about our Judaism. And it continued to put out a volume every month or every 2 months until the Nazis closed it down in 1938 or 39. And I guess I'm wondering if any of you have some thoughts about this moment in American Jewish life with the rise of anti-Semitism. What will be the response? What will we see, an increase of Aliyah? Will we see a resurgence of Jewish identity? Will we see people afraid to participate? Where do you see this going? And I'll just jump in.
I'll just jump in and just say that in that same survey, younger people were less afraid, and I think that is really important, and that the numbers are relatively small. And I think that is remarkable and beautiful that our young people say, I'm not afraid. And I think their response is Jewish practice, Jewish pride, and relationship building across the board, including with your local, not only your friends, your rabbi to non-Jewish clergy, 100%, and Jews to Congress people. Because when I sat down with a local congressperson and said, do you know about this? This was before the pandemic. He said, this shocks me. I had no idea. So we're in this, our Congress people are not reading the Pew Study. They're not reading anti-Semitic Facebook comments. So go and sit with your local congressperson, your local ministers, your local non-Jewish friends, and practice Judaism. I'm done.
I think that's exactly it. Abba, should I keep going?
Go ahead.
Okay. Right. Anti-Semitism offers a unfortunate but important opportunity to root into Jewish practice, identity. How are you honoring your ancestors who themselves were in a much more vulnerable position than we are? Young Jews, especially Gen Z, I think don't if you're white, it's not cool to be white. So right, it's actually an opportunity to root, for me, right, for example, into my Ashkenazi Jewish identity. What does it mean to have been a part of an oppressed group in the past, to be a part of a group in power now? And then I'll just say, we also need to be talking about the tension between rise in anti-Semitism and the conversation about safety with regard to our increasing racial diversity, in terms of what it is like for, what is it like for our non-white Jews to walk into a synagogue where there's a security guard outside. That's a really important conversation to be had in this section as well. Right.
I was going to say that I wonder if young people fear less, Elka, and I wonder how that reflects across the denominational spectrum, because if we have this large swath of young Jews who are Jews of no religion or whatever, and they read about anti-Semitic acts against Jews that are being committed primarily to Jews who are visibly Jews, so when we say young people are not afraid, it's those young people, not Orthodox young people. Maybe, I don't know what the numbers are among young Orthodox. But I also think there's definitely a rise in anti-Semitic acts. Yes. I don't know that there's a rise in anti-Semitism. I think anti-Semitism was there, is there, will be there, the oldest anti-ism in the world. And the last 4 to 5 years kind of gave cover to commit acts of violence against Jews. it's very sad. People did things that I think were condoned. And they are going relatively unpunished. So that will wax and wane. I think the level of anti-Semitism, I don't think it's changed. I think it's constant.
I was one of the people who wasn't concerned about it. One of the young people who wasn't so concerned about anti-Semitism until probably a year ago. Not even, I guess it was probably the last flare up in Gaza that really I said, what's going on here? Like, this really does start to feel like it's bleeding over. And I think, I'm not really sure what kind of anti-Semitism we're talking about here, which I think is part of the maybe part of the problem. There's, I think, different kinds. There's like the classic hatred of Jews for all kinds of reasons. And then there's this more progressive spillover into associating Jews with Israel, and therefore either speaking violently about Jews or committing acts of violence towards Jews because of it. I think we've sort of, as Jews, I'm not trying to victim blame, but we have sort of backed ourselves into a corner wherein within the Jewish community, Israel is sacrosanct and you can't not be pro-Israel, right? Until recently, I think that's starting to shift, but you know, that has been sacrosanct, and then turning around and saying, well, you can't associate all the Jews with Israel. So I think that's a challenge that we have to wrestle with in the Jewish community. Again, I'm not saying that we deserve any kind of anti-Semitic attack, but I think that the association of Jews with Israel has been very strong within the Jewish community. So without it, from without, it's easy to see that. And then but I think what we really have to do is call it out when we see it, especially for those who exist in progressive circles. Really try to parse out what's going on. Are we attacking Jews? Are we criticizing Israel fairly? Where is the line, and how are we drawing it? I'm not part of those conversations a lot. I think it's easy to get canceled out of those conversations, so we have to be careful.
I want to ask a concluding question that's open enough to allow all of you to just very briefly share something about this conversation that you wanted to say. Before I do that, before I share kind of a question to anchor that in, I want to apologize to everybody who is on the call. Just because of the size of initially 150 people, now 109, we weren't really able to respond to your chats or hand raises, but we are downloading the chat, and I think it will be a thoughtful part of the conversation. And I hope that we'll have opportunities in more intimate settings to have those conversations. I think one way to sort of capture or somehow synthesize your takeaways of this conversation, but of the study, is if there's a way to succinctly convey what's the leadership challenge of this moment. All of you are in positions of Jewish leadership. Many of the people in the call are in positions of Jewish leadership. What does this moment call us to do, call us to focus on? And there's a lot, so maybe the question should be refined as, what's one particular challenge of Jewish leadership that emerges for you from this moment and from what the Pew Study presented us with?
Okay, 10 seconds. Amir, go, but let's make these 10 seconds. Okay.
Oh boy.
Leon,
You're not moderating.
I know, but I'm aware of the time.
But she's the mom.
Empathy with the other. It's hard for me. My blood boils sometimes, but it's It's listening and empathy.
Thank you.
Get weird, teach Torah, do good, do justice.
Right, so piggybacking on those, just and finding partners who agree on some things and who are bound to disagree on others, but work together on the things that we agree. Listen to each other and be courageous. Be courageous in reaching out to the other and saying, I want to understand your story. I want to hear what is your Pintel that says, you know, this is who I am as a Jew, or what are the many Pintelas? Just to listen and embrace.
Thank you, Misha. Elka.
10 seconds, Ima.
I took her 10 seconds. She yielded. Sorry.
I don't have anything to add except to say that I think this is a wake-up call to look at our growing divisiveness as an opportunity for uncovering what unites us, and to regard the other as an opportunity for curiosity, for curious conversation, and not outraged conversation.
Thank you. I want to thank, first of all, I want to thank all of you who joined us this morning, afternoon, evening, depending on where you are. What a stimulating conversation. And I want to thank you, Rabbis Elka Abrahamson, Misha Zinkow, Amir Zinkow, and Maya Zinkow. Thank you for sharing your dining room table conversation with us. Thank you for your thoughtful and incredibly expressive and articulate reflections. Thank you for opening yourself up in terms of heart and mind in this reflection of Pew. And I'm really grateful, and I'm sure that all the people that learned from you and were inspired and whose thinking was provoked by your comments are equally grateful. Thank you so much, everyone.